professionals, welcome back to the Simply Trade News Roundup. I'm here with Lalo and Andy. As always, you should know by now if you listen to them every week. My name is Annik. I feel like I never introduced myself, but if you listened the first time, which might happen because I met a lot of people at ICPA in Dublin. I just got back. And I talked to many people about the podcast, some that have listened and some that have not. So hopefully this will be one of the episodes that you are listening to now for the first time, which would be awesome. Anyways, we have loads of articles, meaning loads by 3 articles, that we want to talk to you about today, or I guess kind of discuss. Well, let's get started with the 3 articles. You know, we never want to keep this too long because it's a quick news roundup, and we want to give you some insights. So first article is, wow, we're not far from me because the German far-right aides arrest for alleged China espionage. I don't even know how you guys say that. Espionage, I would say. Raises concerns over foreign interference and political vulnerability. So an aide to a member of Germany's AfD party, and I've heard this party a few times because I know, well, it's not a party that we want here, has been arrested on suspicion of espionage for China. So the arrested individual, Jian G, is accused of passing information to Chinese intelligence about discussions in the European Union legislature and spying on Chinese opposition figures in Germany. Wow. I'm like, what are they trying to see? And why here? So let's talk a little bit about it. First of all, what are your thoughts on this? Or, you know, we know China going into trying to get information from America, and now they're trying to do it in Europe. I feel like they're trying to do it everywhere. But where is this moving forward to? Or what are your thoughts on this one?
Do you want to start there, Lalo, or what?
Yeah, well, there's not much on my end in the sense that, this is clearly, I would see or feel like there would be a trade takeaway here if those persons were doing it unknowingly. In other words, like they shared something without them knowing and or not being aware of the law, etc. But in these 2 cases that the story cites or this article cites, it's very clear that obviously they knew what they were doing. When you spy on somebody, you're not doing it unintentionally. You're very well aware of what's going on. And secondly, when they were sharing information, they knew very well what they were doing and did not innocently share, something that wasn't supposed to be shared. So anyway, but if it was, I guess the takeaway here is that you do need to be aware of those exporting. We've talked about this quite a few times. So you just need to be aware of exporting certain technical and or physical, anything really, with foreign nationals that are not, in this case, the EU, and that they're Chinese or Iranian, whatever the case may be. You're not supposed to be sharing that if they are, stipulated in the export controls of that country, or in this case of the EU. So anyway, that would have been the takeaway had that not, so that's the only thing I had. And that's the only way I can add a trade twist to this. So,
yeah. So, how can we or they ensure, or in trade specifically, how can they ensure that, trade relationships with China are based more on trust and transparency? Obviously you don't know that in the first place because everything seems like it's trustworthy and there's transparency. But I feel like if you go deeper into such situations, there obviously is malicious or a malicious way of doing things. So while how can we have this transparency while minimizing these risks of foreign interference or manipulation?
Well, the issue here is that in this particular case, China is not playing fair, and people need to wake up and see that. I've been saying this for a while. keep in mind, China is playing hardball and everybody else is trying to pacify them and is basically playing softball. You can't do that in this case. If you look to see what they were striving to do in this particular situation, they had somebody acting as a spy to find out what were the inner discussions of the EU governments, European Union. And so in that, if they know what is being discussed, what concerns, what are the positions they're trying to develop in negotiations, then China then has, it's like playing cards and they know what you're holding in your hand. It's, so they're cheating in this case. So, as you're asking, what can we do in the trade? It's that basically is you're looking here and supporting in this particular case, it's an elected official, and other elected offices as well as bureaucratic offices that hold them accountable. It's like, you know what, as far as sharing that and going back through, it's like what you should and should not be doing. The point I'm looking at is, again, this is something that you need to be aware, need to look to see what's happening here as far as the information. China is trying to find out what's going on, so they take a dominant position. So here's the other way to look at it. What's the impact of this? In this particular case, it's Europe, but guess what? European jobs in the end suffer if China is able to negotiate better deals. And it ends up costing Europeans more money because the Chinese cheated out of this scenario. On the flip side of that, here in the U.S., we look at it as a flip side or another part. Look, folks, if you are an elected official, it doesn't matter what part it is. Like, they're looking to see, it may be some minor committee or something. People are trying to find out, whether it's China or anybody else, they're trying to find out what you're talking about from a government perspective. You've got to make sure you cross the T's and dot the I's as far as following certain protocols, but then you also have to take the appropriate steps to secure and not share the information. And, and if you find somebody that compromises your office, they need to be fired and or held up on treason charges.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not sure who in an organization or in an industry, specifically in trade, I mean, there's levels to what people do, obviously. And I think in the compliance world, people should definitely be aware of such situations because it's so common, because trade is one of the bigger aspects where China wants to look in. That's where you kind of get information on what we're doing and how to get information back to China. So I feel like, well, going also into the next article, businesses should really evaluate their risk and diversify trade. I mean, partners, probably. We've talked about this, that you need to look in what other direction you can go other than China and explore alternative markets to kind of mitigate the impacts that are about to happen. Because there is also China imposing anti-dumping levy on U.S. propionic acid imports. So China is imposing a 43.5, I believe that's pretty high. If I'm looking at this number, tax fee, I guess, a levy. And it's kind of a threat to the United States because that's pretty high, and that is affecting some people's business, and it'll affect, I believe, consumers at that point also. I'm not quite sure. But okay, so I mean, once they have decided that they are going to impose this kind of anti-dumping tax onto companies, what strategies can people implement to mitigate the impact of these fees to kind of maintain a market competitiveness?
The issue right at hand is that China basically has rendered this particular U.S. product non-competitive by putting a over 40% additional duty on it. So in that realm, I mean, it's not surprising because we still have the 301 tariffs coming in from, China products coming into the U.S. that has an added duty rate on it, an added levy, if you want to call it that. It's added tariffs. So China is just putting and reversing it. Well, in this, expect the U.S. to retaliate against China on some things, and in particular, the Chinese steel industry and metal imports, which is, we talk about in this article in references where the U.S. is talking to Mexico about not utilizing Chinese metal products and Chinese steel, or at least not using that and exporting those products made in Mexico with Chinese metal products into the U.S. because the U.S. is going to put an added tax on it. So, it's a retaliatory type scenario. The point being is what could be done is already passed. China's already issued that additional duty rate. So the question is going to be what else is going to happen, and it's going to go back and forth. China's playing hardball. And this is just another example here where they're retaliating against a specific product, and U.S. sellers in this case have to look at expanding the markets elsewhere.
Okay. Well, I agree. And now I would like to move away from China because I actually despise talking about China. While I do find a lot of articles because it seems like it's a never-ending story, which it isn't. So we're going to my favorite topic, which actually it's not. And I do have something to say about this one. So this is called new post-Brexit border controls. So there's implication for importers and exporters. And I did at ICPA listen to a Brexit a speaker that was, I guess, speaking on Brexit. It was a session. And it was really interesting. And someone even mentioned it to be like an asylum. Like it really messed Europe up in lots of ways. It messed Europe up and it messed, Britain up. So it was really interesting to listen to because I recently wanted to buy some, and this is funny because I'm a consumer, right? Everyone is. And I wanted to buy some shoes and they were sold by someone in the UK. They also sell in the United States. You can easily get them there, but you are able to get them in the UK. And me being in Germany, I mean, they're not part of the European Union anymore. So when I wanted to buy something, I was able to get on the page. I was able to click the shoes I wanted. And then it said, oh, we're sorry, you cannot buy these shoes because they're over 150 pounds, over 150 pounds, and we're not able to ship them. It's not our fault. It's Brexit. It literally said, it's not our fault. It's Brexit's fault. And I thought that was interesting. I was like, what? I've never seen this before, but I guess I never really ordered from the UK. So in this particular article, so that was interesting, but in this particular article, it says that the second phase of Britain's new post-Brexit border controls will start on April 30th, introducing physical checks for medium risk animal products, plants, and plant products, along with new charges for importers bringing goods through the port of Dover and Eurotunnel. So I think this is good. I believe when I listened to the session, she was saying that there has been a lot of things that they haven't talked on. So, I mean, there's a lot still up in the air. But I kind of wanted to talk on this particular, what do you guys think on this one? Like, what is your opinion on this post-Brexit thing?
Well, in my opinion, let me just say this, is that the UK is implementing this due to the actions that Europe took last year, where they implemented the very same kind of actions where goods from the UK, particular, animal-based products, food items and all that, that the EU then stopped a lot of these things for physical exams. And so it's taken a while. So the UK is just implementing the same type of procedures that Europe had put into place last year. So this is not a case where it's just purely on the UK. It's a case where I guess the EU was very upset that the UK folks decided to withdraw from the European Union. I will say, people can go back and forth, but keep in mind it was voted upon twice by the citizens of the UK.
No, and I heard that. I know that, but I have not spoken to one person, and I even spoke to someone at the conference. I mean, there were so many people from the UK, and I asked, and none of them were like, "Oh, terrible decision." And even if when I go, I ask people because it's so interesting to me what they say, and no one has known. And then the guy and at the one of the people in the session that was listening, I mean, I guess he works with it a lot, and he did say that he thinks this will not stay this way forever, and it's going to return. They
may join back in, but here's the thing that I will say,
but not in his
though,
lifetime,
Annik,
he said, which was funny.
Is that what led up to it? People are,
I'm not sure how old he
they're
was. I don't want to
feeling the
judge.
effects of that. Yeah, but let me just say this. I think the issue here is that leading up to the vote to withdraw from the European Union, I fault the leadership of the EU. I fault the leadership of each individual European country, as well as that in the UK as well. The elected officials, the administrations of all of them, because the average citizen has not reaped the benefits of this European Union as a whole in respect. And the UK in particular, that a lot of jobs were lost. They were being transferred out of the UK. So yes, there was things back and forth. Now, has things changed? Yeah. And opinions have changed, but the decision's been made. So they've moved on. Would they vote to go back into the EU? That's up to them. But I look at it from the standpoint that these procedures and this processes, it's inconvenient, but yet there was one other thing about this, and that was the sovereignty of each country was being whittled away and lost. And that was another issue. So the average citizen was not seeing the benefits here. And I'm saying average, I'm talking the average Joe Blow in England was not seeing the benefits, nor the loyalty to the country. It was, it was being whittled away. So on this, it's just a case now with the procedures that they're putting into place. It's more of like, okay, Europe, you're going to do that, then we're going to do the same kind of thing. And that's what I see in this.
Yeah. I mean, obviously they have to kind of figure things out on how to operate and how to make it in a way where people don't hate it and prices might go down, or I don't know, but I think something needs to happen. And I guess they're taking steps. We'll just see how these steps are going to affect them in the future. Anyways, these were our 3 articles. Very fun topics, or not so fun maybe. But I do have an interesting fact, which I was obviously just at the ICPA conference in Ireland. And so I do have an interesting fact on Ireland. Do you know their largest export market, Ireland's largest export market? Can you give me a guess?
Market? Like the US?
Yeah.
You mean like a country or a product?
Yeah, a country.
US?
Yeah, you're right. The second one is actually Germany. So that's funny, right? The first one's US and the second one's Germany. And the US, there is 63 billion in exports. And then for Germany, it's just 25 billion.
What's their biggest export? Do you
63
know?
billion.
No, what product is their biggest export?
Yes, I did see that right now. I think it was machinery, but I don't know if that's into the US. But I think one of their most exported things are machinery. That's what I've read, I think. Is that what it says?
Electrical machinery. Yeah, that's what it
Yes.
is. I just saw it. Yeah.
Look at me.
Whiskey's
reading
not
that.
even on the top 10.
Well, and then someone also said that people should buy all the whiskey in Ireland because it's duty free now or something. If you're from, yeah. I didn't even have any whiskey. I didn't have any. I had, you know what I did have? By the way, guys, I'm like over 21, so I can talk on this. I had a Guinness, and it was surprisingly so good. So good. Delicious. Yeah. So Lalo has to go. And I have to go too. And Andy has to go too. He has to go ride his horse with his cowboy hat. So, all right. That was good. All right. We'll see you next week. And please like all our things. Watch us on YouTube. Listen to us on anywhere you care for. And have a great day. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.